we have an update to the story of the angry army captain who was filmed screaming profanities at soldiers during a training exercise. The army has finally managed to charge him with something, and it's not even the most serious crime he could have been charged with. We'll go over that in more detail after I tell you how he was finally charged. As a quick reminder for those of you who don't remember this story from last year, here is the original clip of the angry army captain. In it, you can hear him yelling expletives and threatening to deploy his soldiers into combat before they are ready because he is frustrated that they are not moving fast enough. Now, even though this clip is under a minute long, it took place over the course of several hours. According to one of the soldiers present there, it started off as a normal day of training, but then things changed when the captain noticed that the food trucks were late in arriving at the training site. He then began to get irritated and yell at all the soldiers present there. At some point, he even jumped into the back of a truck, where he proceeded to kick another soldier who was trying to set up a satellite communications antenna. He also grabbed a helmet from another soldier and threw it to the ground while continuing to yell at them. In total, 8 soldiers came forward and said that they were victims of his physical and verbal abuse. It was also discovered that the captain had been reprimanded multiple times before for losing his temper and mistreating his subordinates. With all of this evidence against him, you would think that it would be an open and shut case and the captain would be charged with some kind of abusive conduct or at least negligent dereliction of duty. But no, that is not what happened. In fact, it took almost a full year for the army to come down on him with 2 very minor charges: maladministration of military funds and failure to obey an order. Let's start with the maladministration of military funds charge. This actually stems from a totally separate incident that happened a few months prior to the screaming incident. What happened was that the captain scheduled a morale event for his soldiers, which included a catered dinner and drinks. But when the bill came, he refused to pay it unless the caterer discounted it by 20%. When the caterer refused, he told the soldiers to write down whatever amount they wanted on the receipt, and that he would reimburse them later. The caterer received 3 separate checks from the army for the cost of the dinner, but each check was for a different amount, and none of them were for the actual amount owed. Additionally, the army conducted an investigation into whether or not the soldiers had to put money out of their own pocket to cover the cost of the dinner. But they were cleared of any wrongdoing since the captain instructed them to cash the checks and keep the difference. So the only crime the soldiers committed was following their captain's orders. The army ultimately determined that the captain abused government funds by getting reimbursement checks for amounts that were less than what the caterer was owed. They also found that he caused the finance office to issue 3 checks instead of just 1. All of this amounted to a grand total of $34.22 in misused government funds. Now, don't get me wrong. Misusing government funds is a crime just like any other form of theft. But in this situation, it was clearly done out of personal greed, rather than any kind of genuine military need, and the amount stolen was a paltry $34.22. If you ask me, that is a petty crime that does not warrant jail time. A suspended sentence seems like more than adequate punishment for stealing such a small amount of government funds. The second crime he was charged with was failure to obey an order. Now, I'm not entirely sure what order he failed to follow, but it must not have been that important because he only received a reprimand and a restriction to his pay and allowances. A reprimand is basically a formal letter stating that he violated Army regulations and that his performance was unsatisfactory. As for the restriction to his pay and allowances, I assume it means that he will not be able to receive certain tax-free benefits that service members are entitled to. I find it hard to believe that the Army spent all that time investigating this guy, only to charge him with 2 very minor crimes. I mean, they could have just let the finance office handle the misuse of government funds and pressed more serious charges against him for his behavior during the training exercise. There was clear evidence that he lost his temper and physically abused his soldiers, but the Army didn't want to admit that. Instead, they waited 11 months to charge him with 2 minor crimes, so that they could sweep this issue under the rug and save face. If the Army is going to waste all that time and effort investigating misconduct by service members, they need to make sure they press appropriate charges so that justice is served. Otherwise, it will look like they are sweeping misconduct under the rug just to protect the image of the Army. There is also the possibility that the Army did press more serious charges against the captain, but they were not made public. However, I highly doubt that's the case, because if they were serious charges, they would have been made public in order to generate media coverage. That would deter other service members from committing similar offenses. I am not trying to say that the captain should not be punished for his actions, but the charges need to fit the crimes. Losing your temper and physically abusing your subordinates is much worse than misusing government funds and disobeying an order, and the punishments should reflect that. This is not the first time I've seen the Army sweep misconduct under the rug. In fact, it's been happening more and more frequently lately. I am not sure why this is happening, but I think it has a lot to do with the Army being more concerned with their public image than taking care of their soldiers. When misconduct is swept under the rug, it sends a message to other service members that the Army is not serious about taking care of its soldiers, and that makes me sad, because that is not what the Army is supposed to be all about. When I was in the Army, we had NCOs who cared about us as people. They went out of their way to make sure we were taken care of, and to help us succeed in the Army. Unfortunately, it seems like this is becoming less and less common nowadays. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Do you think the Army is sweeping misconduct under the rug? If you're a current or former service member, please share your thoughts on how the Army handles misconduct these days. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you liked this video, make sure to leave a big thumbs up. Also, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. I post new videos every week covering a variety of topics related to veterans, current events, and American history. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.